could read your thoughts. From the future.
The movies of
1985.
Well, hello. Thanks for joining me in the year 1985. As you know, I am stuck here after an accident with a time machine, but that's okay. I've got my trusty bingo ball, and each week I spin it around, select a number at random, and then watch a movie based on that number. So, without further ado, let me spin the bingo ball now and see what comes up this week. And we have a number out. It is number 48. Now, I'm just going to load up my little spreadsheet on my Commodore 64. That takes a few moments to load off tape. Number 48 is a movie called Kiss of the Spider Woman. Now, I know nothing about this movie. It looks like it's a co-production between Brazil and the US, maybe? I'm not sure. BR. What's BR? Is it Brazil? Anyway, it's 2 hours long, and like I said, it's completely a black box to me. But what I plan to do is head on over to the Coburn Video Centre in Spearwood, just a short drive from where I am at the moment, and I should be able to pick it up there. Before I do that, I'm going to pop on the TV, but that reminds me, I have got something to share with you this week. I have actually got a newspaper here with a TV guide from the 4th of March, Monday the 4th of March, in Perth, Western Australia, 1985, I should say. So I thought I'd just run through that quickly and give you an idea of what was on television on the 4th of March, 1985. Now, like I said before, we only had 3 TV stations at the time, the ABC, Channel 7 and Channel 9, and only one of those ran 24 hours a day, and that was Channel 9. What they did is late at night, they just started showing old black and white movies back to back until they got around to 6 a.m. the next morning. And then they would show Animals, 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 which just the theme song for that show is stuck in my brain. It just drove me insane, because I think I only ever watched that show when I was home from school sick, and it was like a fever dream. So Channel 9 would then go into the early morning news at 7 a.m. and then immediately show a movie, in this case, Father Goose from 1965. So they were showing pretty old movies back in the day. That would be followed by Get Smart, and then Midday with Ray Martin. And we discussed a few weeks ago when Craig was on the podcast how Ray Martin has only recently taken over the midday slot, pushing Mike Walsh into a late evening slot. Then The Jolson Story from 1946 followed that, another movie. So that's 2 movies today already. At 4 p.m, the Aussie Ostrich video show, which I think was one of these compilation shows hosted by a pretty bad pink puppet of an ostrich, looking suspiciously like an emu. Now, Aussie Ostrich was, of course, the sidekick to Daryl Summers. And I think that in 1984, the previous year, Hey Hey at Saturday had moved from a Saturday morning kids cartoon TV show to a late Saturday night, I think like 9:30 on a Saturday night, called Hey Hey at Saturday Night, became a late night variety show. Of course, after a while, they'd move earlier. That was not for a couple of years, I don't think. But Daryl and Ozzy were at their peak popularity, so it's not the last we'll see of them. Ozzy Ostrich was followed by Fraggle Rock, proper puppets, Jim Henson quality. Then the Monkees' Blankety Blanks, which I believe Blankety Blanks would have been hosted by Daryl Summers. The 6 p.m. news, Sale of the Century with Tony Barber. And then on to TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes before the Mike Walsh show at 9:30. He didn't last long in that time slot. And then movie after movie after movie, The Shootist, Brett Maverick, Devil's Mountain, Carry On Nurse, and then round to 6 a.m. the next day. So I think during the course of the day, they'd showed 6 or 7 movies. Now, that was the only 24-hour station. You would understand why 13-year-old kids in 1985 would not spend a lot of time inside watching television. They'd be playing outside and maybe playing with their new home computers or watching stuff on video cassette. Now, Channel 7, that would start the day at 7 a.m. They were closed before that, showing some kids programs like Wizard and Warriors if you wanted to watch stuff before school. Then they would go on to show movies. So they would show a couple of movies. In this case, Galactica: The Cylon Attack from 1979 and They're a Weird Mob from 1966. And then doing the same thing as Channel 9, game shows and cartoon compilations. So it's Wheel of Fortune, The Bugs Bunny Show, Wombat, and then going into the new Price is Right before with Ian Terps Turpy before the 6 p.m. news. Then at night time, Sons and Daughters and TJ Hooker and stuff like that. The Dick Emery Show finishing things off at 12 o'clock midnight and then closing until the next day. The ABC was even worse, but the best programming was on the ABC. So they started the day with Sesame Street and Play School and then closed at 9:30. Just closed, shut the TV station right through until 10 past 1 in the afternoon, where they showed a repeat of a magazine program from the weekend. That went for 20 minutes and then they closed again. And then an hour later, they reopened the TV station, showed Countrywide and Sesame Street again, Play School and things like that. But it really kicked off in the late afternoon after school with Roger Ramjet, The Wombles, Star Blazers. So I spoke about that a few weeks ago. Spaceship Yamato, the Japanese animation. And then straight into the ABC News at 6:30 p.m. So it was half an hour later than the other channels, and that became important, which we'll see later, because there was ABC showed a program called The News Free Zone, where I got my theme music from at 6 o'clock, because it was the only station that wasn't showing news at 6 o'clock. Now, after the news, they showed Mother and Son, Fawlty Towers, Minder, and then they closed at 11 p.m. after showing soccer highlights. Now, I would have stayed up and watched Mother and Son and Fawlty Towers with my parents, probably after watching their Channel 7 news and things like that. My younger brothers would have gone to bed. My bedtime was when Minder came on. I seem to remember the opening song from that signalled my bedtime back in the day. So there you go. That's a quick run through of what we were watching on TV on March the 4th, 1985 in Perth, Western Australia. Now, I need to also mention that the 6 p.m. news on Channel 7 would have been Rick Arden and Susanna Carr. They are the longest running pair of news hosts or newsreaders in the world. They have the Guinness Book of World Records, celebrating 40 years on the air this year. Their very first show was January 26, 1985. Anyway, that's enough. Let me pop the TV on and I'll go and grab the video.
World's okay, it's another lovely day. You're feeling alright, then you get a sudden fright. There isn't time to play, they want it there today. You know you're not alone, just pick up the phone. Say hello, Comet. Hello. Say hello, Comet. Say hello, 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 Comet. Right across Australia, or just across the town.
Okay, I'm
Comet never
I'll just pop
lets
this
you
in.
down. Say hello, 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 hello.
Let's pause the video before the movie starts. And I just want to spend some time looking at the cover of this video cassette. I have no idea what this film's about. I've never watched it before, but the cover has a picture of a spider web with a woman dressed in black and some sort of mask on, standing in front of it with the sun glinting through behind her. And I think some mountains and ocean in the distance and some palm fronds sort of around the borders, as if she's in the jungle. It says William Hurt, Rule Julia and Sonia Braga as the three main actors, and Kiss of the Spider Woman. It's got some other credits down the front, no one I recognise, but there are a couple of reviews. So, greatness from beginning to end, a brilliant achievement. That's Janet Maslin, New York Times. one of the finest films of the year. You'll never forget these performances. That's Joel Siegel from ABC News. Now, flipping over to the back, there's now an image of the woman's face, sort of looking at somebody above her. Lots of makeup on, bright red lipstick. Presumably this is the Spider-Woman. And also an image of William Hurt and another man and woman. I'm not sure who they are. A few more quotes. Mesmerising, tense, charged with intellectual energy and wit. Ralph Novak from People magazine. Gripping, hypnotising, a marvellously crafted film. Rita Kempley from the Washington Post. The little blurb says, Kiss of the Spider-Woman is a complex story of a friendship that develops between two men with radically different perspectives on life. In a prison cell somewhere in Latin America, William Hurt's eccentric Melina and Raul Julia's Valentin, a political prisoner, have only one thing in common. They are both victims of society. To pass the time, Melina entertains Valentin with fanciful narratives from old movies. His favourite stars Brazilian beauty Sonia Braga, who appears as three different people, including the title character in the film. Hurt and Julia give outstanding performances based on the best-selling novel by Manuel Puig. Kiss of the Spider-Woman is a remarkably haunting film. So there you go. It's 2 hours long, and I'm going to sit down and watch it now. Please hang around until the end where I'll give my impressions, and then we'll go and discuss news from 1985 so that you don't have to look at the news in 2025. But here we go. Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Let's press play on tape now.
Once upon a time, in a tropical island far away, there lived a strange woman.
How can you remember all that junk?
If you've got the keys to that door, I will gladly follow. Otherwise, I will escape in my own way.
Then your life is as trivial as your movies.
Stepping into the spotlight is that legendary star, that ravishing chanteuse, Lenny La Maison.
Shut up! Don't let me die.
It begins with seduction. A story of love creates a passion,
Dial 2 times, then hang up.
a danger, a madness. William Hurt. Raul Julia. Sonia Braga. Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Feel it, and you've got to feel it again.
Wow. This was a great movie. Really, really good movie. Exactly the sort of thing I wanted to discover by doing this project, the movies of 1985. So, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, set in Argentina during its military dictatorship, based on a book written by Manuel Puig, I think, an Argentinian author. And it's kind of like watching a stage play because a lot of the movie is a dialogue between two cellmates in prison. There's Melina, the gay window dresser played by William Hurt, sharing a cell with a Marxist revolutionary former journalist Valentin, played by Raul Julia. And they form a strong friendship, even though they are obviously from two very different backgrounds. Now, what happens is Melina, the window dresser, tells stories to Valentin to sort of pass the time, but also to act as a bit of a diversion when he's gone through torture and stuff like that. Now, what's interesting about this movie, Kiss of the Spider Woman, is it is in the news again because they have remade it. In fact, in 1993, they released, so like I said, the 1985 movie is based on a book. In 1993, it went to Broadway as a musical, also based on the book. In 2008, there was a documentary that was released about the making of the 1985 movie, and you can see that full documentary on YouTube. This year, 2025, or shall I say 40 years in the future from this year, in the year 2025, another movie has come out called Kiss of the Spider Woman, released at Sundance in late January this year, and I'm sure it will be coming to theatres soon. That version of the story is basically a filmed version of the 1993 Broadway musical, and that stars Jennifer Lopez and Diego Luna, who you might know from the TV series Andor, and it's directed by Bill Condon, who directed Gods and Monsters, which was one of the big hidden gems from the movies of 1999 last year. So the Kiss of the Spider Woman is quite topical, it turns out. Anyway, let me give you a brief summary of the first 15 minutes of the movie. So it begins with a long, drawn-out opening credits sequence, and we've seen that quite a few times with the movies of 1985. These days, credits tend to be really pruned down to be as brief as possible, but in 1985, you sat through minutes and minutes of opening credits where they not only showed the cast and the director and the producer, but they showed a lot of the other roles as well that you would normally see in the closing credits of a more modern movie. And these credits were shown as full screen letters, parallax scrolling. The movie title sort of is repeated and scrolls in several layers of parallax, and then the credits sort of fade in and out on top of it. And they use an old-fashioned news type kind of font to do that. And that sort of sets you in the mood for these flashbacks that happen quite soon, because what happens is we open with the character Melina narrating a story about a cabaret star. And we see that story in like sepia tones, as if it was an old-fashioned movie. The cabaret star is played by Sonia Braga in her role as Lenny. And then we cut to the prison cell. Now, initially to me, it looks like a concrete wall. It actually looked like a blackboard in a classroom with a few childlike chalk drawings on it, but it ends up being a concrete wall in a prison cell. The camera pans around and we see William Hurt dressed as a woman, lots of pink clothing and surrounded by lots of glamorous photos on the prison cell wall. And he's narrating this story about Lenny, the cabaret singer. Now, there's another prisoner played by Raul Julia. He's the political prisoner. His name's Valentin. He's listening to the narration and he's sort of involved in the story. But basically what it turns out is Melina's narrating this story that he's very fond of. He sort of views it as a romance movie, but it's a romance between this cabaret singer and a Nazi. It's set in Nazi-occupied France during World War II. So obviously this political prisoner, Valentin, has a very different slant on it, and he views it as a Nazi propaganda movie. Now, there are a couple of characters in this movie. So what happens is the cabaret singer, basically a Nazi general falls in love with the cabaret singer, and meanwhile the Nazis are persecuting these Jews that are unloading contraband delicacies, I suppose, from the back of a truck. Meanwhile, members of the French resistance are spying on all of this, and so forth. So So basically that sets things up straight away. So you've got this friendship between these two guys that are sharing a prison cell, but they have very different views about the things that they are talking about the culture that surrounds them. And what's like interesting tying this into last week's movie, which was Desperately Seeking Susan, which also featured a cigarette girl. So in the cabaret club, we see a cigarette girl as we go into that world in the sepia toned version of the movie that's being narrated by Melina. So interesting that we've had cigarette girls in two movies back to back. So this is all set in Paris. It's like I said, it's a Nazi propaganda movie, but that leads into the relationship between the two men. Basically, these two men are sitting in prison thinking about escape. William Hurt's character is escaping through retelling all these movies that he loves, whereas Raoul Julia's character is actually plotting to escape in real life. So that's really the first 15 minutes, and the rest of the movie just goes deeper and deeper into the relationship between these two men with a few twists and turns along the way. Now, like I said, this movie is like watching a play. It is a lot of dialogue, and it's based on a novel that's very interesting in the sense that it's all dialogue. So there's no narrative voice in this novel. It is just a conversation between two people. And what the author does is they don't even have conversation in quotes with he said this and he said that. Basically, they just put a dash between lines of dialogue to indicate that the speaker is changing, which is quite an interesting way of doing it. Now, this movie was the first independent film to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. And William Hurt did win the Best Actor Oscar, and that was the first time an Academy Award was won by an actor for portraying an openly gay character. So a couple of really big benchmarks there in 1985 for this movie. Now, while filming this movie in Brazil, William Hurt was abducted at gunpoint by multiple gunmen in Sao Paulo, Brazil, because like I said at the beginning, this was a Brazilian-US co-production, and he was told to face a wall with a gun pointed at his head. But certain that he was going to be executed, he basically refused and talked himself out of the situation, and the kidnappers ended up fleeing the scene. Now, this film was in post-production for 14 months before it was finished. It debuted at the Cannes Film Festival on the 13th of May, 1985, only 59 days after the 21-year military dictatorship featured in the film had come to an end. So there you go. Now, also, William Hurt and Raoul Julia basically just they didn't work for nothing, they just worked for scale. They took the minimum wage, effectively the minimum wage for acting in this movie, which basically just paid for their flights to Brazil and their hotel stays in Brazil. So all in all, it was a very interesting movie. I would give it 4 out of 5. Shall I give it 4 out of 5? It's very close to being a 5 out of 5 movie, just because it was such a big discovery for me. But I will give it 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. But I would say it is definitely a Mintox movie. So please track it down and watch it if you love movies. And I would recommend reading the book as well. I haven't read it yet. I've read a lot of reviews about it, but it's on my list on Goodreads. So there you go, Kiss of the Spider-Woman. I'll be very interested to see the 2025 version of the movie as well. So actually, I'll give it 4.5 on Letterboxd. So that's probably my highest rated movie of the year so far. But now, it's time for...
I'm driving along and I'm just singing my song. I'm in a news-free zone.
Well, welcome everybody, to the News Free Zone, that time of the podcast where we look back at the news from 1985 as a bit of an antidote from the news of 2025. It's going to be a short one this week, I think, but this week, week 9, isn't it, of 1985, there was the Grammy Awards held in Los Angeles, and of course Lionel Richie and Tina Turner were the big winnings there, as long as Cyndi Lauper being awarded the Best New Artist. Now, talking about military dictatorships, in this week in 1985, Ferdinand Marcos, the president of the Philippines, fled the country following the People's Power Revolution, marking the end of his 20-year rule. And the UK miners' strike. Now, we talked about that last week, I think, but the UK miners' strike ended, and it involved at its peak 142,000 coal miners. Like I said, it's going to be a short one this week. I've only got one Usenet article, but please go to olduse.net if you want to read social media as it was on the internet in the year 1985. Over on net.micro.cbm, the Commodore Usenet group, John Reiner was still talking about this whole rumour that the Amiga would have 7 megabytes of memory or be capable of being expanded to 7 megabytes. And he said he still can't understand why anybody would need 7 megs of RAM space, because we have a workstation with 2 megabytes of RAM and it can run 16 concurrent shells, and you can't even keep track of that many. We also have a PDP-11 with 2 megabytes of memory, which serves 64 simultaneous users, and it has 900 megabytes of disk drive space. So he just can't see the need for 7 megabytes in a multi-user system. And like I said last time, my laptop has 45,000 times that amount of memory. And what do we do with these laptops, people? We just read social media. Isn't it crazy? Anyway, that's all from me this week. Please click on the Discord link in the show notes. Come and chat about these films on Discord with us, and stick around until next week when we'll be doing it all again by spinning the bingo ball and selecting a random movie from the year 1985 to watch. So until then, cue the electric tom-toms.